So we've got pricky marks with ruling lines that you can clearly see. Okay, so pricking marks are so one of the rules for writing Torah scrolls is that it has to have what's called sirtut, which is ruling lines. And ruling lines are, we get like a notebook today, and it's got like those lines that are printed on it, right? Well, what did they do back then? So first of all, they didn't have pencils. Pencils didn't exist. Certainly not around the year 1000, to the best of my knowledge. Certainly not in the Western world, right? Maybe they didn't. I don't know if they existed in China or not. But in this part of the world, they didn't exist. And so a Torah scroll is required even today to be written with ruling lines. And the ruling lines, they take a sharp instrument and they scratch the line along a ruler. They literally have like a straight edge, and they scratch it to make a straight line. And then in some writings, they write with the base of the letter on the line, right? That's what we do in English. But that's not what they do in Hebrew. In Hebrew writing, the letters hang from the line. And you can actually kind of see that even in this photo, that there's almost a straight line with the top of the letters, and that lines up with the ruling line. And what's the pricking mark? Well, how do you know where to hold the ruler? You need two lines to hold the ruler between, or two dots. And so they would make a hole in the parchment at regular intervals, and they would do it on the other side of the parchment. And then they would scratch in size, sometimes with the back of the they didn't use a quill, they used something called a kulmus, a reed. With the back of the reed or with some other sharp instrument, they would scratch in this ruling line, this vertical ruling lines. You can see the vertical ruling lines there. The horizontal ones you can't see so well. You can kind of see them. I can see them. But you can definitely see the pricking marks. And we don't always see the pricking marks because the pricking marks are considered ugly. So they would usually do it way at the edge of either side of the sheet of a Torah scroll, and then they would cut that part out, or they would fold it over when they sewed the two sheets together, right? A Torah scroll is made of pages, or really sheets, we call them, yiriot in Hebrew, sheets that are sewn together. And a lot of times, usually, they were either trimmed off the pricking marks, or they were folded over and hidden by the sewing, by the seam. But in this case, you can actually see them, which is kind of cool.
Thank you, Nehemia. And I was actually going to ask about a sheet. What is a sheet? So you answered my question for me before.
So sheet is a translation of the Hebrew term, right? They're really pages, right? But in Hebrew, we call them sheets. Some libraries call them membranes. I'm not a fan of that term, but it's just as good as any. Yiriot, sheets, is the Hebrew term. And it's interesting. Let's think about it for a minute. Why there's some interesting thing about the sheet. I mean, it's been argued that the Tabernacle uses the same word, sheets, for the tent around the Tabernacle, or not the tent, the outer courtyard, and then those sheets were held up with hooks, and the word for that hook is vav, as in the letter vav, because vav actually means a hook, not a tent peg. It's actually a hook. And so some people have argued, Dr. David Moster has been on this program, has argued that when they would begin each column of the Torah scroll with a vav, he calls it a visual midrash. I don't know if I mentioned that in this lecture or not. But it's the idea of, okay, if we have these yiriot, these sheets, let's take another piece of terminology from the Tabernacle, which is the vav of the columns. Oh, and then each column is called a column, right? So it's a play on words there, because the word column is something that holds up a sheet or a pillar, right? We say pillar in English, right? But in Hebrew, it's the same word, column, pillar, amud. But it's also a column of text, right? And so the sheet is broken up into several columns. And then each column at the top is held up by a vav. And in this case, it's literally the letter vav. So that's kind of cool.